Hi everybody, welcome back. So I should probably change the name of this video or this channel at some point to sorry I haven't uploaded in a while. Um, so this video is going to be on kind of a weird topic, and it's one of the reasons why I haven't uploaded in a little while. I've wanted to talk about this, but I haven't really felt like I've been able to, I don't know, have a great way to kind of discuss it. And my concern is that things are very political right now, and I could see people potentially taking things out of context, maybe not taking them in the vein that they were intended. And basically what I want to do is I want to talk about George Floyd and the tragedy of his death. But I want to step away from the actual incident itself. What I want to do is I want to talk about systems engineering, because a lot of people who watch this channel either are systems engineers themselves, or the people who aspire to work in systems engineering. And we have a system that has some obvious problems. Also, some problems that may not necessarily be obvious. And I think that people from our background who spend a lot of time analyzing systems can be very useful right now. It makes a lot of sense to be very methodical when trying to fix a problem that impacts society to this extent. And we are uniquely suited to do so by virtue of the toolkit that we possess, namely analyzing systems. Now, obviously, the systems that we typically are analyzing, especially in the context of this channel, are IT-related systems, right? So whether that's a program or whether that's a service that we're running, it's some kind of technical system. But the philosophies that we use, the methodologies that we use to analyze these systems and fix them can be applied with other kind of systems, such as policing. And also looking at the system at a whole, right? So we're particularly well suited to do that. And I think that it behooves us to do so, right? And do so in a way that we can help guide some of the potential solutions that we come up with, right, as a society. And this is interesting because this is not just something that is tied to policing in just the U.S. This is something that has been very interesting to see. And I say interesting not to take away any of the tragedy around this. But you can see the reaction has been worldwide. And in this particular context, I'm going to be talking about applying some of those tools to evaluating the issues going on in our particular system, but they can be used to analyze any kind of system. And I think it's a very good exercise to do. So yeah, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of the different kind of things that we can use to analyze that system. And I'm going to go pull up a quick search. I'm going to do a quick search for the scientific method. So I'm just going to go grab this image right here because this looks like a decent one. So the first thing to do is recognize that no matter where we fall on the political spectrum, and no matter what our initial reaction to George Floyd was, and this is not necessarily saying the very initial reaction, but their initial reaction in terms of what the problem was, we can go use the scientific method. Right? So observe, right? And actually they have research in here, so I don't know if that's necessarily what we want to do. So this is more. Actually, let's look at the Wikipedia page. We'll see what they actually say for this in terms of. All right. Process. All right. So the first thing we want to go ahead and do is we want to formulate a question. All right. So this is generally based on an observation. So we can make this a little bigger so hopefully you guys can see it. We then come up with a hypothesis. All right. Why we think something happened or what the cause of it is. Right. We then go ahead and make a prediction that we can test based on our hypothesis. We then test it to see if our hypothesis was correct, and we go analyze the results to go figure out if this in fact was true or not. So the way I've learned this is observe, hypothesis, predict, test, and then analyze, and then repeat, potentially. And you may repeat many times. But the idea is, one of the things that this does is it removes your bias. Right? So, trying to make this a little bit less political, and just sort of talk about the general sort of range of things you can go see. On one side of the spectrum, we have people who are saying that all cops are racist. And then the other side of the spectrum, people saying that no cops are racist, and this had nothing to do with racism. And like many things, I think that the truth probably falls somewhere in between, which is exposing a little bit of my politics. And what I'd like to do is trust you. I'd like to trust you all who are watching this video to take it in the manner that it's being intended, right? So my hope is that we can, as a society, help make things better and try to resolve these issues. So one of the first big things that we have in our toolkit is the scientific method. Right, so that's a big one. So the next thing that I think is worth doing is looking at a root cause analysis. Right, and this is going to help us in terms of determining what our hypothesis is. Right, we want to go ahead and figure out what is the root of the issue that all things stem from. Right. So an example of this might be, George was late to work. Right. So that's our initial observation. All right, so we go ahead and think of this as a problem. The problem was George was late. And the solution to this could be fire George. George should not be late. Right. But we should go deeper. And one of the mechanisms that you can use to look deeper into things is something called 5 whys. Right. Right. It's a very commonly used methodology for doing root cause analysis. There's other ways to go do this. I'm going to talk about 5 whys because that's one of the simpler ones, and it's pretty effective, right? So George was late to work. Why? Why was he late to work? His car broke down. Well, we could say, let's replace the car. We can fix the problem. We can just get him a better car, right? The car broke down. Get him a better car. It's not going to happen again, right? We can go further. Right? Why did the car break down? Well, let's say in this case, timing belt failed. Right? So the timing belt failed. Why? Tension was wrong. It was too loose. Right. Why? Screw wasn't tightened, right? Say that more generically. System wasn't properly maintained, right? So now we get into the 5th why, and conveniently for this example, this happens to be where we actually get into a root cause. Now, 5 is somewhat arbitrary, right? It's not necessarily saying that every single time it's going to be 5 steps deep, but the idea is that if you haven't gone 5 deep, there's a good chance you haven't really gotten to the root cause. So and once you sort of see some root causes, you can kind of develop a feel for when you're at the actual root cause of something. So why wasn't it maintained? We did not have maintenance schedule process. And what you can do is you can take this backwards up the chain, by instead of using why, you replace it with therefore, right? So we did not have a maintenance schedule or process. Therefore, right, our system wasn't maintained. Therefore, we did not have our belt tensioned correctly. Therefore, our timing belt failed. Therefore, the car broke down. Therefore, George was late to work. So that's the root cause. Now, you could potentially even take this further and say, why didn't we have a schedule or a process? And it might be that we don't have an environment where we have this kind of methodology where people are doing reviews, people are doing root cause analysis, people are trying to predict what failures are. So it can even go deeper than here. But if you do the same kind of thing with George Floyd, I'm not going to get into my root cause analysis, but I actually did a root cause analysis of this. And the reason why I don't want to go share that is because I think it might bias yours. I did this. And it's not always just one cause, right? So this is, one issue, but it might be multiple. And my analysis of things, it was multiple. I think this is a really, really useful thing to do. And what this helps you to do is figure out that really the issue is generally deeper than the level at which a lot of people like to look at these things for. So if we recontextualize this and we change the problem statement from George was late to work to George was killed by a police officer, then we can use the same process. Why was he killed? Well, someone knelt on his neck for almost 9 minutes. Why did someone kneel on his neck for almost 9 minutes? And you continue on and you go down the chain. And it can lead you to some interesting things. And one of the things that I think is really important is if you do not address a problem at the root, you can rip out and replace an entire component, such as the car, and ultimately you'll have the same issue come up again. So if we had stopped at replacing the car, we put a brand new car in place, but we had done nothing to address our problems in terms of creating a maintenance schedule and having some kind of process in place where either at some regular interval or every time that we drove the car, we stopped and we checked for any kind of issues and did a basic servicing of the vehicle. Eventually that new car would break down too, and it'll break down in a very similar way. And we can use these tools to try to go figure out sustainable, real solutions to our problems. And we can then go use the scientific method to vet what we believe those issues to be. So at any one of these levels, we could go create an observation. The car broke down. Right? And then we could go ahead and say that, that was the reason. The reason why George Floyd was late to work is because the car broke down. And then we could go ahead and make a prediction. Right? Now, some of these, the scientific method will not be able to sort of help you kind of figure out where, if we made the prediction, if you replace this car, then we will not have that issue again. Well, in the short term, that may look like that's actually going to bear fruit. And it may work. But unless we go all the way down to the root, this is going to be a problem that persists. So I know a significant number of you guys already work in systems engineering or some field that is related to it. Site reliability engineering, DevOps, systems administration. These are all sort of disciplines that are either part of systems engineering or related to systems engineering. And as such, you probably have some existing experience and tools to go talk about this. But for those of you guys who are relatively new to this, one of the things I think you could do very well to look at is the Google Site Reliability Engineering books. And if you just do a search for Site Reliability Engineering book, Google, it'll take you to this landing page. It's landing.google.com/SRE/books. And there's a number of different systems here that are really useful to take a look at. But the one that I'm specifically pointing to is the Site Reliability Engineering book, although I'm sure that the workbook would also be very useful to look at as well. So, one of the things that we might look at is the, so this is a postmortem kind of section. So this is actually, I think, the Site Reliability book, not the workbook. So I think I opened up on a different page. Where was that? Did I open up the wrong one? Let me close all these. All right, so I think these might be actually, these are actually the same book. But the troubleshooting section specifically is very useful, but also the postmortem section I think is handy. I think I actually had that open up here before. So, if you think about literally a postmortem, that's what this is talking about. Um, so this has some case studies that they can show you. They first off show you a bad postmortem, and then a good one. And then the other kind of version, which is more the kind of philosophy, the general site reliability engineering book, is going to go talk about this in a slightly different way. So they look very similar, but this is going to go more over the philosophy, if I can talk, kind of piece of this by, looking at some kind of mechanism to go ahead and detect alerts. So going back to the idea of blameless. So obviously in the context of justice, blameless isn't something that we're looking at. But when you're looking at it from systems analysis, systems engineering, in order to go fix a system, do a root cause analysis, don't fixate on the individual. If an individual does something wrong, that's because they're acting within a system that allows them to do something wrong, right? Think of the idea of like a root user, for example. If I log into a production system, I do an rm-rf star in the root directory, I delete everything. Very easy to go say that the person who was logged in as root is the cause of that issue. And in one sense, they very much are. They made a significant mistake. But they were running a command as root on a production system that could cause massive damage. So from a systems engineering perspective, we would say that the problem actually was their ability to do that. They should not be able to delete all of the data in a file system on a production system, right? So that's where the failure is. Now, from a justice perspective, right, if we're talking about prosecuting somebody and determining if they were legally to blame for murder or the death of somebody, that's a separate issue. So we're talking about in the sort of dispassionate sense, and I know that that's a hard thing to do in this context, but I think this is a good idea. So keeping things blameless for the purpose of fixing the system is very useful. There's a lot of other kind of things. So looking at, how are we getting the data for this, right? Did we go sufficiently deep in the root cause analysis? What is our action plan? And they have some examples of, action plans. Not having just one person do this, but having this be looked at by somebody else and going through to go check for assumptions. And it's oftentimes very useful to have someone be a devil's advocate in this scenario. And, this is the handy thing to do for yourself too, especially when you're looking for your own kind of biases, is whatever your position is, try to argue it from the opposite side, right? Argue against your own position. My father was a lawyer, and this is something that he would do all the time, where if you had a strongly held belief, he would steelman that, basically try to come from the opposite side and try to attack that argument as much as possible with the intention that either he would find flaws in his or your reasoning. It's a little bit annoying when he used to do this to me as a teenager, but in retrospect, I value it. Or he would strengthen the argument from the other side to make it even a better, more cohesive argument. It's a very powerful tool, not even for just this stuff, but just to do in your own life. It's whatever your bias is, right? And it could be anything. So, so this is, I'm not going to go through this whole document, but there's a lot of really interesting stuff on this. So going through the stuff on postmortems, going through the stuff on troubleshooting, how do you go ahead and create a monitoring system? All of these have analogs for real life. Right? We're talking about them in the tech kind of context, but all of these have analogs for real life, right? So how would we create a monitoring system to find potentially dangerous police officers? That's a thing that could be accomplished. Is it going to be perfect Rev 1? No. But that's something that could potentially be accomplished. When we do come up with some changes that make sense to go fix things, how do we go implement those from a systems point of view? Right? How are we going to release these changes into our system, policing? How does that work? And maybe, depending on how far you go in your root cause analysis, the issues are actually below the level of policing. Right? So there may be multiple root causes here. That's one of the things that I found in mine. I'll share it with one of the observations that I found in my root cause analysis is that if you take things deep enough and your logic follows the same path that mine did, there may be other root causes. It may turn out that my analysis is incorrect. But one of the things that seemed to jump out at me and mine was the costs of a war on drugs are significantly higher than the benefits we get in terms of reducing the amount of drug usage. That's sort of giving you a little bit of a hint. And I don't want to bias anybody, but that's really one of the conclusions that I took away from this, is that if you follow this down far enough, if we have a mandate for the police to take a very militarized posture in order to eliminate drug usage, especially drug usage that tends to be enforced specifically against some communities, then it can create a level of antagonism between the police and those communities. And that's something to look at. And there's other ones as well where, the gut reaction, and I think that there's some truth to this, is that this is a race issue. But it may not necessarily be a race issue in terms of the obvious one. It may be that there are systems in place that cause, black people to be poorer. And the issue with policing is one where it manifests itself in black communities because they are statistically more likely to be poor. And that's a weird thing, because if you look at this, the way that those results would show up if a police department was racist could be very, very, very similar to the way that the results would look if they treated people a particular way across the board, and the people that they were treating disproportionately were black. It's interesting. Interesting, and maybe not the best way to say that, but if you can separate yourself emotionally from this stuff, it's, and this is why we need to then take the scientific method and say, well, we have two potential hypotheses here. One, the police are racist. Two, we have something in place, potentially the war on drugs or redlining or things like that, that cause more poverty in the black community, lack of, generational wealth. There's a number of different things. But we can then analyze those hypotheses and create some tests to see, all right, well, if it is poverty, then we should be able to go find some other population group that's very similar, and we should be able to predict similar rates of death, or maybe depending on how big the population set was, ways to go manifest that. So we could find data that should match, if that's the case. And if it's strictly race, we could find data that would match if that's the case. So we could say, well, if it is race and it's not poverty, then we should see similar rates of death among affluent black people versus poor black people. And I haven't done all this analysis. I've just done the root cause part, right? So I haven't done the scientific method kind of part for this. A lot of it, I just don't have access to the data. But using this approach, we can free ourselves from our own systemic biases, whether that is the police aren't doing anything wrong, or on the other side, it's completely the fault of the police. Right? We can look at a more methodical approach to try to analyze this. And the thing about it is if we don't analyze the problem right, we can spend a huge amount of effort trying to fix things and then just have the same problems again. And I don't know about you, but I never want to see another video or hear about another incident like George Floyd for the rest of my life. Because watching that video was heartbreaking. And yeah, it was tough to watch. And I think the one thing that does give me a lot of hope about this is I've not talked to anyone who didn't find it horrifying and awful to watch. And that means that there is a very good chance to use what's going on in the world to potentially fix these problems. And anybody who's worked in systems engineering will tell you that's one of the big hurdles. Sometimes you can find a solution to something, but people won't want to go implement it because it's too hard or it costs too much. And my hope is that, given what everybody's seen, that's not the case right now. So anyway, sorry for not posting a video in so long. I was a bit hung up in terms of trying to figure out how to post this, how to bring up these ideas in a way that would be productive, that would not be divisive. It wouldn't get me into trouble, honestly. There's it's weird times, and it's really easy when we're very emotional and sensitive to be ready to go after people with pitchforks, and that's from both sides of things. To think of it, and not necessarily with pitchforks, maybe that's not the best way to say it, but to assume that people's intentions are negative. And this channel's been really interesting to create. I've found that the people who watch these videos and who comment and send me messages through email or wherever or seem like a really, really good group of people. So my hope is that we can have these kind of conversations and be productive and try to make things better. So what I think would be very interesting is that I'd love to see if any of you guys do a formal root cause analysis, if you guys do some 5 why breakdowns, post a link to those, or I think YouTube blocks links, but so post your questions and your observations and the results of those root cause analyses in the comments. And I'd love to see them. I think it'd be very interesting. And then go back to your communities, whatever those communities are, all right? Because we're systems engineers in our jobs, but we're, Texans or Jews or tennis players or people who are really into Magic the Gathering or whatever it is, right? Our work is only one context. But then take the things that we look at, take the methodologies that we're talking about here, and then take those back to the other groups that you're part of and have these conversations. And let's make sure that the fixes that we implement, because I hope that there's going to be fixes, and I think there's certainly at least some of them coming down the pipeline. let's make sure that those fixes that we implement are the right ones, so they really do make a difference. So take care of yourselves, stay safe. Hopefully I will have a more positive video next time. And now that I've sort of gotten this one off my chest, I think I'll be able to post videos a little bit more regularly. So take care of yourselves.